Hello kids, we are here again for another science lesson. This is your teacher, Uncle Ernesto. The last time we met, we talked about life processes of living things. And before we go on to our today's topic, let's go over the homework that you were given the last time. Let's go over the homework. Question 1. State two life processes of living things. State two life processes of living things. And first answer, we say living things are sensitive. Living things are sensitive. They respond to changes in their environment. They respond to changes in their environment. That is what we call sensitive. And some use their nose, the ear, the eye, the tongue to sense changes in their environment. We also say living things grow and die. They grow and die. So they are born, or they start very young, they go through stages, and then finally they grow old and die. So living things are sensitive, and then living things grow and die. Let's look at the second question. Mention two differences between plants and animals. Mention two differences between plants and animals. And then we said plants prepare their own food, but animals feed on plants. Plants prepare their own food, but animals feed on plants. And the process plants use to prepare their own food is called photosynthesis. We also said plants move parts of their bodies, but animals move their whole bodies. So you cannot see a plant moving from one place to another, but you can see the branches, the leaves moving. But animals move their whole bodies. So I believe you had all the questions correct. Well done. Now let's move on to our today's topic. Let's move on to our today's topic. And the topic for today is materials around us. Materials around us. And before we start with the topic, let's get our lesson objectives. By the end of the lesson, you will be able to 1. Describe what a material is. Describe what a material is. 2. State 3 examples of materials. State 3 examples of materials. And then lastly, mention 3 physical properties of materials. Mention 3 physical properties of materials. So by the end of the lesson, you will be able to describe what a material is, state 3 examples of materials, and mention 3 physical properties of materials. What are materials? We said we are going to talk about materials around us. So what are materials? Materials are things that physical objects are made from. Materials are things that physical objects are made from. When we say the word physical, we are talking about things that you can see and then touch. Things you can see and touch. So materials are things that physical objects are made from. Now, let's look at some of the examples of materials. some examples of material. The first example is the wood. As you see on your screen, wood. And I believe each and every one of you knows what a wood is, or most of you have seen a wood before. So some of the materials that surround us, an example is the wood. And where do we get the wood from? We get the wood from trees. We are able to get wood from trees. So the first material here is the wood. And we can use the wood for so many things. So the first example is wood. Let's go to the second example. The second example is the leather. The second example is the leather. And where do we get the leather from? We get it from animals. That is the skin of animals. And on the screen you can see goats, you can see cow. You can also get some from an animal called yak. So we get leather from the skin of animals. We get leather from the skin of animals. And leather is an example of the materials that surround us. Let's go to the third one. The third one we have here are metals. What you see on the screen are metals. And we have a lot of metals. Some examples are the gold, we have iron, we have silver, we have aluminium, we have steel. So there are a lot of metals that surround us. And each of these examples are used for different things. So another example of materials that surround us is the metal. So you can see different kinds of metals here, and you can see different colors of metals. Some are shiny, some are dull in color. They are all metals, and they are part of the materials that surround us. So remember, kids, that metals are some of the materials that surround us. Let's look at another one. Clay. Clay. So as you see on the screen, we have clay. Clay. And I believe you are all familiar with clay. There are so many uses that the clay can be put to. So clay is another example of material that surround us. When we say materials, it means we can get a lot of things from that particular thing. So we can get a lot from clay. So clay also becomes an example of materials that surround us. The next one you see on the screen, as you see, we have several objects here, and we call it stones. Stones. So stones are also examples of the material that surround us. Stone is also an example. So you see different colors of stones, and these different colors can be put to many uses. So stones are also examples of materials that surround us. The next one is glass. 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 So glass is also an example of material that surround us. Glass. And if you see the heap of item here, it's called the sand glass. And this sand glass is used for manufacturing glass, or it is used, other things are added to it, and we get what we see here, glass. So glass is also an example of material that surround us. I know there are a lot of things that you can find in your homes that are made of glass. So remember that glass is also an example of material that surrounds us. The next one you see is wax. Wax. And where do we get this wax from? Wax. You see the animal bee here. The bee gives us the material wax. And we all know that the bee produces honey for us. The bee produces honey for us. So this, what you see here is called the honeycomb. What you see here is called the honeycomb. The bee do this honeycomb to store the honey that the bee produces. And they are also used for keeping their young ones. So after producing the honey into this honeycomb, the byproduct of the honey becomes this honeycomb. This honeycomb is dipped into hot water, and after some time this honeycomb will melt and it will float at the top of the water. This honeycomb is collected, and this is what we get: wax. So we get wax from the honeycomb, and bees produces this honey, or bees produce this honeycomb for us. So wax is also an example of material that surrounds us. We will get to another lesson where we will get to know the uses of all these materials. But first, let's put it in mind that wax is also an example of material that surrounds us. And the animal bee produces this wax for us. The next we have is the wool. Wool. And this is the wool. You have the wool here. Wool. Where do we get this wool from? From animals like sheep. From animals like sheep. So the sheep also help us to get the material wool from their skin. And wool can also be used for so many things. So wool is also an example of material that surrounds us. The next one is the rubber. As you see on the screen, the next one is the rubber. And where do we get the rubber? We get it from trees. So when you look at the top here, they make a hole around the stem of the tree where the rubber is collected into a bowl. And what you see here, what is being collected here is called latex. What you see here, the whitish substance you see here, is called the latex. And we get it from wood. They add some chemicals to it so that it becomes a little bit hard, and then we get what we see on our screen here. So we get rubber from trees. We get rubber from trees. And rubber is also an example of materials that surround us. Rubber is also an example of material that surround us. The last one you will look at is the cotton. As you see on the screen, what you see there is called the cotton. And cotton can also be put to many uses. Cotton can also be put to many uses. So these are some of the examples of materials that surround us. Some of the examples of materials that surround us. Now, Kate, let's move on to the physical properties of these materials that we've talked about, the physical properties of these materials that we've talked about. So when we say physical properties, what are some of the behaviors of these materials? Are they the same? Are all the materials we looked at, are they the same, or they have some differences between them or among them? So let's look at the physical properties of materials. Some materials are hard and heavy. Some materials are hard and heavy. This means they do not break easily. This means they do not break easily. Some materials are hard and heavy. This means they do not break easily. So if you look at on the screen, we have an example like the stone. The stone is hard and heavy, and the stone does not break easily. So the physical property of stone is that it is hard and heavy. And I believe you all know stones. Stones are very hard. Stones are very hard. Another example is the wood. Wood is also very hard. Wood is also very hard. If you go to school and then you go to your classrooms, you have your desks there, and they are made of wood. And I believe the wood is hard. That is why you can sit on it without the desk breaking. So wood is also very hard. And then you also have metals. Metals are also very hard. Metals are also very hard. So one of the physical properties of materials are that some are hard and heavy. And this means they do not break easily. They do not break easily. So if a material does not break easily, then that material is hard and heavy. Let's go to the next one. Some materials are soft and flexible. Some materials are soft and flexible. This means they can bend without breaking. They can bend without the material breaking. So some materials are soft and flexible. They can bend without breaking. And an example of such a material is the rubber. An example is the rubber, as you see on your screen. So some materials are soft and flexible, and that means they can bend without breaking. An example is the rubber, as you see on the screen. And because rubber cannot break into pieces, it can be used to do so many things. Because of its softness and flexibility, the rubber can be put to so many uses. Let's look at another physical property. Some materials are opaque. Some materials are opaque. Some materials are opaque. When we say materials are opaque, this means we cannot see through. This means you cannot see through. So when you hear the word opaque, that means that we cannot see through, or light cannot pass through. So some materials are opaque. That means we cannot see through. Okay, so let's look at some of the examples of materials that are opaque. We have metal. The metal is opaque. You cannot see through. So if I put a metal in front of you and I go and stand behind the metal, you cannot see me as I'm behind the metal, because that metal is opaque. We cannot see through. We cannot see through. Another example of opaque material is the wood. So the wood is also opaque. This means that we cannot see through wood. So if I enter my room and then I close my door, if you stand behind the door, you cannot see me through the door made of wood. This means that the material wood is opaque. We cannot see through them. Another example is the stone. Stone too is opaque. You cannot see through stones. Stone too is opaque. You cannot see through stones. Let's look at another property of material. Some materials are transparent. Some materials are transparent. This means we can see through that material. So, Kate, if you hear the word transparent, that means that we can see through that material. We can see through that material. And any material that we can see through, we call it transparent. Kate, that material is called what? Transparent. So if you can see through any material, then it means that material is transparent. Let's look at an example of material that is transparent. The example we see here is the glass. The example we see here is the glass. The glass is a transparent material. The glass is a transparent material. So anytime you board a car and then you look through the glass of the car, you can see the environment that surrounds you because the glass is transparent. Even if all the glasses are rolled up, you can see through the glass and see what is happening in the environment. So some materials are transparent, and this means we can see through them. This means we can see through them. Another property of metal or another property of material is materials are waterproof. Materials are waterproof. Another property of materials are that materials are waterproof. And what do we mean by waterproof? It means they do not allow water to pass through. They do not allow water to pass through. So if any material does not allow water to pass through, then it means that that material is waterproof. That material is waterproof. So if you go and buy sachet water, you can see that the water does not pass through the rubber because that rubber is waterproof. That rubber is waterproof. If you pour water inside the cup, you see that it doesn't come out because that cup is what? Waterproof. So some materials are waterproof. They do not allow water to pass through. And examples are metal and then rubber. So metal and rubber are waterproof materials. They do not allow water to pass through. Some materials are smooth. Some materials are smooth. This means they have regular surface without lumps. They have regular surface without lumps. So you see that the surface will be very smooth without any lump or what? Scratches. The surface will be very smooth. An example is the formica board you write on at school, or even your table that you sit on. You see that the surface is very smooth. The chair that you sit on, see that the surface is very smooth. If you sit on a rough object, you see that you will feel uncomfortable. So some of the materials are smooth, and this means that they have a regular surface without lumps. An example is the metal and then wood. An example is the metal and then wood. Now kids, I hope you have enjoyed the lesson on materials. Let's now move on to the summary of our today's lesson, what you have learned for today. And today we are talking about materials that surround us. Materials that surround us. And we said that materials are things that physical objects are made from. Materials are things that physical objects are made from. And we looked at some of the examples of materials as wax. We talk about wax from bees. Bees give us wax. We also talked about the material rubber, and we get rubber from trees. We get rubber from trees. We also have the material called the cotton. We also talked about the material called the cotton. We also talked about metal as an example of material that surrounds us. We also talked about metal. We also looked at wood. Wood as an example of material that surrounds us. Wood. And then we also talked about stone as example of materials that surround us. So some of the material that surround us are wax. We have rubber. We have the material cotton. We have metal. We have wood. We have stone. So these are examples of materials that surround us. We also talked about the physical properties of materials. That is the behavior of these materials, or how these materials look like. And we said that some are strong and heavy. Some are strong, like the stone, and then the metal, and then the wood. They are strong materials. We also talked about soft material. So the cotton, for instance, is soft. It's an example of a soft material. We also talked about materials that are opaque. That means that we cannot see through them. Materials that are opaque, we cannot see through them. We also have materials that are transparent. Materials that are transparent, that means we can see through them. Transparent materials are materials that we can see through them. We also talked about some materials being heavy. Some materials being heavy, like the stone and like the metals. They are all heavy materials. We also talked about materials that are rough. Materials that are rough. So stones are rough. Stones are rough. We also looked at materials that are smooth. Materials that are smooth. Glass, for instance, is a smooth material. The wood can be a smooth material. We also looked at materials that are waterproof. Materials that are waterproof. That means that they do not allow water to pass through. Those materials that are waterproof do not allow water to pass through. And then lastly, we talked about materials that are light. They are not heavy. Light materials are not heavy. Like the rubber, for instance, is not heavy. So kids, these are some of the properties of the materials we looked at. Strong, soft, opaque, transparent, heavy, rough, smooth, waterproof, and then light. So kids, these are some of the properties of materials that surround us. I believe you went through the lesson with me. So now, I want you to take this homework. 1. What is a material? What is a material? 2. State 3 examples of materials. State 3 examples of material. 3. Mention 3 physical properties of material. Mention 3 physical properties of material. So kids, I want you to take your time and then do this homework that you are given. Make sure you do the homework, and if you followed me through this lesson, I believe you will get everything correct. Until we meet again next time, this is your teacher, Uncle Ernesto. Bye-bye.